The name echoes through history, a chilling whisper of absolute power, of systematic cruelty, the secret state police. Novelists conjure its image, television dramas revel in its darkness, Hollywood embellishes its infamy. Yet, few truly comprehend the mechanics of its terror. Fewer still recall the architect of its devastation. One man's name, forever linked to its legacy, Heinrich Müller, known to posterity, with a grim inevitability as secret state police Müller. A figure of immense influence within the Third Reich, a direct subordinate to the infamous, he vanished amidst the ruins of Berlin in the spring of 45, swallowed by the chaos, never to be seen, confirmedly, again. Whispers persist of a clandestine flight to South America, a haven secured by the shadowy Odessa, a network said to protect fleeing functionaries. Could Müller, alongside others of like mind, have found refuge in Paraguay, perhaps Argentina, far from the ashes of the fallen Reich? Other rumours whispered of a different fate, capture by Soviet forces, his knowledge and network exploited until his usefulness expired, an inglorious end in some Moscow prison. What then became of the man who commanded one of the most feared agencies in the world? To understand his end, one must understand the beginning, the genesis of the machine he came to control. Initially, the secret state police existed only within Prussia, a consolidation of all existing security agencies forged in the aftermath of unrest. Then came the pivotal moment. Control shifted, rising swiftly in the hierarchy, gaining command. The agency was restructured, expanded its reach across the entire nation, becoming a subordinate to the security police alongside the criminal police. As war engulfed Europe, the agency was integrated into the newly formed main security office, answering directly, and at its head, controlling every aspect, every agent, Müller. He remained in that position until the twilight of the Reich, his name synonymous with ruthless efficiency. His direct subordinate, a name now forever stained with infamy, oversaw the department responsible for Jewish affairs. Together they organized the systematic deportations, the endless trains to the camps, the industrialization of suffering that continues to haunt our collective memory. The agency spread like a cancer across occupied Europe, its tendrils reaching into every corner, its department dedicated to crushing resistance, dismantling espionage networks, hunting down the so-called enemies of the state. Its agents, a ubiquitous presence, their clothing mirroring their task, blending into the shadows, many clad in the infamous uniform of state actors, the long black trench coat, the ubiquitous hat. Though not formally part of the other organisation, they operated under its umbrella, their uniforms subtly different, their allegiance clear. Yet, who was this man? The fulcrum of this machinery of control? Müller was by all accounts a man of unremarkable physical presence, smallish in stature, impeccably dressed, with piercing eyes that seemed to see through any facade. If one were to design a paragon of bureaucratic evil, Müller would be the blueprint. Efficient, utterly devoid of sentiment, he even unnerved those of his own ilk. Senior figures within the hierarchy spoke of his chilling presence, the cold curiosity in his gaze, the unsettling reserve that cloaked his every interaction. His power lay not in charisma, but in his organizational abilities, his relentless drive. He was a man possessed by his work, rather than any fervent belief in the ideology it served. Ironically, this man, who rose to command the agency, had harboured deep reservations about the ruling party. Born into a family of civil servants in Bavaria, at the dawn of the century, Müller trained as an aircraft technician. The conflict intervened, drawing him into its vortex. He distinguished himself as a pilot, decorated for his bravery, his skill in directing artillery fire from the skies. After the armistice, he joined the police force, rising swiftly through the ranks, becoming the head of the political police in Munich. In this role, he was a staunch opponent of communism, a fervent suppressor of dissent, and held the ruling power in equal contempt, dismissing its leader as an inept. How, then, did such a man become the chief enforcer of their policies? The answer lies in the pragmatism of a rival, who saw in Müller a tool of unparalleled potential. Recognizing his ruthlessness, his capacity for hard work, his background in professional policing, he invited Müller to join the nascent agency. The decision was met with resistance from within the hierarchy, but he prevailed, securing Müller's appointment. By the autumn of the next year, Müller held the rank of authority, a lieutenant general. He remained at heart an pragmatist, implementing state policy with cold efficiency. After the death of a peer, Müller answered, a tall Austrian, a man bearing the scars of past conflicts. Müller attended the infamous conference, the meeting where the extermination of the Jewish population was formalized. He investigated the attempt on the leader's life, the bomb that nearly succeeded in ending the war prematurely, a failure that resulted in a wave of arrests, trials, and executions. He remained loyal to the regime until its bitter end. The agency headquarters, located on the Prinz Albrechtstrasse in Berlin, a building that bore the scars of Allied bombing raids, its library of records consumed by fire. Müller and his staff operated from temporary locations until the Soviet assault forced them into the city's network of bunkers. There, in the heart of the dying Reich, Müller remained, even as his superior fled to the relative safety of the mountains. He recognized the inevitable. He declared, stating his intention to avoid capture by the advancing forces. Yet, he lingered, a ghost in the machine, until the very last days. When one of his comrades attempted to desert, Müller was tasked with his interrogation, a final act of loyalty in a crumbling world. The deserter was executed, and Müller, with the flight of his superior, assumed temporary command of the entire security office. Was this the reason for his continued presence in the ruined city, a hunger for power that outweighed all other considerations? Witnesses, including the leader's secretaries, reported seeing Müller in the bunker, even on the day of leader's suicide, still resplendent in his general's uniform. The last confirmed sighting of Müller placed him in the bunker on the evening of the 1st of May, as the remnants of the regime prepared their desperate breakout attempts. He chose not to join them, disappearing without a trace. The head of the agency, a man wanted for war crimes, a potential asset for any intelligence agency, vanished into the ruins of Berlin. In the aftermath of the war, a joint intelligence operation, a combined effort, launched a search for Müller, attempting to unravel the enigma of his fate. They interrogated the upper echelons of his organization, those captured. All were apprehended except for Müller. The conclusion, reached by both sides, was that Müller had not fled to the mountains, but had remained in Berlin until the end. The investigation was hampered by the commonality of his name, Heinrich Müller, a name shared by other individuals. There was even another official with the same name. One rumour suggested that Müller had changed his name, fleeing south with an official, but neither man could be located. Intriguingly, Müller was last seen in the company of this same official on that fateful evening. In the following years, Müller's mistress was questioned, her home searched, yet no trace of Müller was found. Intelligence agencies concluded that Müller was dead. However, there were twists, new threads to unravel. One of subordinates, a chief spy who cooperated with Allied intelligence during the trials, reported that a German officer, a former prisoner of war in the Soviet Union, had seen Müller in a prison in Moscow. This officer claimed that Müller died in captivity shortly thereafter, but the account could not be verified. And the reporter of this tale succumbed to illness, leaving the mystery unresolved. The capture of Eichmann decades later reignited the search for Müller. Many believed that Müller was still alive, residing somewhere in South America. Authorities reopened the investigation, dismissing the possibility that Müller had been working for the Soviets. They surveilled Müller's relatives, his former colleagues, his former mistress, who claimed to have last seen Müller in the days leading up to the collapse. He had given her a vial of poison, a parting gift. He had not joined the breakout from the bunker, stating that the regime had fallen and he would fall with it. He was last seen with his radio, Specialist, whose body was also never recovered, suggesting they fled together. However, investigators also had potential sources that could explain Müller's demise. The first, a report from a morgue official who claimed that Müller's body had been recovered from the bombed-out headquarters building after the Battle of Berlin and buried in a mass grave in a cemetery. The body, he said, bore identification papers in the name of Heinrich Müller. However, investigators deemed the informant unreliable, though the burial was registered and even marked with a headstone by Müller's children. The second, a senior officer, turned over to the Soviets after the war, claimed that the Soviets had told him that Müller was dead, his body found in a subway entrance, a few blocks from the Reich Chancellery, a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The Soviets, he claimed, had found Müller's identification papers on the corpse. The third, a Home Guard soldier, claimed that he had been in charge of a burial unit, ordered to clear bodies from the area around the ruined Reich Chancellery. One body, he said, stood out. It wore an officer's uniform, though it bore no medals or decorations. It did have identification papers in the name of Heinrich Müller. The body was later moved to a cemetery and interred in a mass grave. Authorities requested information about Müller from the East German authorities, who confirmed that Müller had been buried in East Berlin in a mass grave. However, verification was impossible. Being thorough, investigators first checked the morgue official story, exhuming the grave in question. However, the remains of multiple people were found, none matching Müller's description. The other stories could not be corroborated. The alleged grave lay on the wrong side of the Berlin Wall. The CIA became involved. A senior officer defected to the West, revealing moles within Western military intelligence. He claimed that the Soviets had captured Müller, taking him to Moscow. This contradicted the officer's testimony and the previous stories. The CIA attempted to find more evidence, but the searches yielded little. Agents were caught breaking into Müller's wife's apartment. Disinformation emerged from behind the Iron Curtain, further obscuring the truth. The CIA investigation ended with no resolution. A biographer of another official claimed that Müller was with him after the surrender of Germany, during the strange weeks when a small government operated in northern Germany. He claimed that Müller accompanied his subject during his final attempt to flee south before being captured. Müller, he claimed, left the party, disappearing. However, the biographer offered no source for this information and no explanation for how Müller managed to escape Berlin. The media announced that Müller's fate had been solved, that Müller's body had been found, identified by papers on the body, and first buried in the garden of the Air Ministry, before being transferred to another cemetery and buried in a mass grave. The source for this information were the members of burial parties, clearing bodies from around the Reich Chancellery in May 1945. They discovered old archival documents to support their stories. The body, they claimed, was interred with thousands of others in one of the mass graves in the Jewish cemetery, the same place the East German authorities confirmed to the West Germans as Müller's burial place. Could it be that the feared architect now lies in a Jewish cemetery? We may never know, as exhumation is forbidden. Based on the evidence, two possibilities emerge regarding the fate of Heinrich Müller. The first, that Müller died in Berlin. There is circumstantial evidence to support this claim. A body dressed in officer's uniform which Müller was wearing when he was last seen alive was identified multiple times, each time by low-ranking personnel who would not have known Müller. Each time identification papers were found. The location for one sighting was close to the ruins of Müller's old headquarters. The other two identifications placed the corpse in the vicinity of the Reich Chancellery. The distance is walkable, even under modern conditions. But was the man himself walking? Or was he no longer among the living? Müller was last seen with one of his senior officials when the other bunker personnel broke out. Müller could not have brought civilian clothes into the bunker. but where better to have an escape kit stashed than his old headquarters building? One could theorize that Müller left the bunker, perhaps with his colleague, and headed for headquarters. On the way, he removed his decorations from his uniform, but something happened that compelled Müller to end his own life before he could change out of his uniform. Perhaps troops were close by. Did he shoot himself, as one report claims, or take poison? We know Müller had poison. He gave it to his girlfriend. The other reports do not mention a visible cause of death, suggesting poisoning. The spot where the body was reported to have been buried, the Air Ministry garden, is just down the street from headquarters. So what happened to his medals? Perhaps they were taken as souvenirs by troops, or kept by the burial detail. One report claims that they were returned anonymously to Müller's family, but this is impossible to corroborate. In this scenario, the failure to find his colleague after the war suggests that he died with Müller and his body ended up in the Jewish cemetery. There are 2 points to raise about this scenario. Firstly, on the day he was last seen, forces had captured headquarters and the Air Ministry building, along with most of the area around the Reich Chancellery. Troops continued to hold out in pockets of territory, but slipping through the chaos to reach headquarters would not have been impossible. The leadership planned to assault the Chancellery by then. The personnel planned to be long gone. One point about the scenario raises the possibility that the body in the uniform was a plant. What better way to cover your tracks than to have apparently died? Due to Müller's power, even in the dying days, he could have had his minions procure a corpse of the same approximate height, age, and weight, and had it dressed in one of his uniforms and dumped it close to headquarters to ensure it would be found. Identification aided by papers conveniently placed in the pocket. This might explain why Müller was wearing his decorations, but they were missing from the corpse identified. Clean decorations were removed and pinned to the uniform. Did someone take one of Müller's spare uniforms and adorn the corpse but didn't replicate the decorations? It may sound like something out of a novel, but effecting a body switch would not have been difficult. A further point is that the corpse's head was intact. No effort had been made to destroy the facial features, which would have drawn more suspicion to the corpse than if it had been left intact. Remember that a battle was still raging. The Soviets had yet to capture the bunker, and their intelligence detachment was searching for other high-profile individuals. The priority was to locate them, not to check the rank and file. The second scenario is Müller's successful escape from Berlin, a feat accomplished by few. Müller, as head of the agency, had access to resources and great numbers of people to ensure his escape. But the fact of his hanging around in Berlin while his boss fled suggests Müller was caught off guard by the speed of the Soviet encirclement. If Müller did get away, neither hide nor hair of him was ever heard from again. Investigations never found a single piece of evidence that he lived after the 1st of May. But with someone as wily as Müller, never say never. An outsider, he would have had little desire to socialize with those in hiding. Perhaps he lived out the remaining years somewhere. As we can't exhume the body